Viewers, the debate has been raging, of course, on how exactly to define Hindutva, what to make of it. You've heard a large number of Congress leaders who've equated it with various extremist ideologies, Islamist ideologies. And then, of course, there is the Bharatiya Janata Party and RSS ideologues who are giving it a much more inclusive outlook. Now, let's open this up to two scholars, because that's what they really are. Pawan Verma, who needs no introduction, and of course Vikram Sampath, who's established himself as a very eloquent spokesperson in recent times, authored a scintillating biography also on Veer Savarkar. So let me first begin with you, Mr. Sampath. There has been, and I know that you're probably conversant with the remarks that have been passed by Shashi Tharoor, Salman Khurshid, and even Rahul Gandhi over the last few months and over the years. What do you make of this comparison between Hindutva and some of these more extremist outlooks?
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for inviting me to the show. And I think, as a non-politician and as a historian, I find this preposterous a case of complete false equivalences, comparing apples to oranges and probably worse, because ISIS or Boko Haram and all these have been certified, outlawed, designated terror outfits, which across the world, for decades now, they've been involved in suicide bombings, abductions, rapes, human rights abuses, murders, treatment of people who don't belong to the faith in a very abysmal way, caused killings of tens and thousands of people. Now, just because you cannot call that out and call them out for what they are, which is Islamist jihadi organizations, that doesn't mean you make strawmen of philosophies and themes which are not related to this kind of exclusivist, tendency in India. The word Hindutva or Hinduism, I mean, both of these originated in the 19th century. It was in the 1830s that the word Hinduism was first used more by the British. And all these isms, if you notice, these are used as a way to club together unilateral philosophies, which are always considered lesser than the mainstream, to show some kind of derogatoriness, which is one reason why you don't have Islamism, you don't have Christianism. You call that Islam and Christianity, but you have Judaism, you have Hinduism, you have Buddhism. Everything which does not belong to the mainstream of the Abrahamic faith were always termed as something inferior, and the ism word came up in 1830. And about 60 years later is when you had the first use of the word Hindutva itself in 1892 by Chandranath Basu in his book on Hindutva, which translating Hinduism into Indian languages, where the twa, the suffix that comes, is a state of being. If you are a woman, it is Naritva. If you're a man, it is Purushatva. Similarly, if you're a Hindu, it is Hindutva. And what was this Hindu too? Was it always used as a religious, connotation? No, it was not. It was always an ethno-geographical term, which the Persians used initially, and then the Arabs called it Al-Hind. You find the earliest, references of this in Darius the Great's, inscriptions in the 6th century BCE, and so on, where the people who lived to the other side of the Indus River or the Sindhu River were all called as Hindus. So to that extent, this whole term has ethno-geographical, cultural connotations and far less religious, because religiously speaking, it is a Sanatan Dharma, the eternal flow of life, which is what has thrived in this part of the world, which believes in inclusion, which believes in assimilating every strain of thought. But this false equivalences, Rahul, has always been the case, right from the time of the freedom movement to where, when someone like a Swami Shraddhanand of the Arya Samaj was murdered by Abdul Rashid, a fanatic, someone none less than the stature of Mahatma Gandhi had to call him, my dear brother Abdul Rashid, and I don't consider this as an assassination. And we Hindus need to introspect. We need to get into our psyche to see what actually caused him to pick up the gun and assassinate Swamiji. Similarly, when the Mopla carnage happened in the 1921, then too, they were called as brave patriots who were fighting for the cause of the religion, and the onus was put on the Hindus to introspect. And someone none less than Dr. Ambedkar himself, called this out in his writings, saying, why don't you call out Islamic jihad for what it is? It's too heavy a price to pay for Hindu-Muslim unity that the Congress is striving for, was Dr. Ambedkar's words. And we find the same kind of narrative going on unabated even now. Hindutva is not the copyright of the BJP or the RSS or any organization. Several of us who are practicing Hindus, who are deeply allied with the faith, we believe in Hindutva. We may or may not necessarily be aligned with the RSS. So if the Congress or other political parties need to score brownie points against the current dispensation or the RSS or something, let them do that devoid of bringing in our religion, our faith, our belief systems into it, and by making such preposterous, comparisons to terror outfits and so on. What is the scale of comparison? Has Hindutva caused these kinds of mass genocides? Have we gone around on rampages and bombings and suicide bombers and tens and thousands of people massacred and murdered? So I think that sense of proportion needs to be there. Political expediency makes people talk all kinds of nonsense, but I think they should spare the faith, which should not be equated. And the two equations are very malleable, Rahul. You had that infamous conference called Dismantling Global Hindutva, where time and again it was the same thing, that Hindutva is different from Hinduism and all of that. But by the third day of the conference, almost every speaker, so-called academics and scholars, had converged to the view that there can be no Hindutva unless there is Hinduism. So Hinduism is the bedrock of the problem, and that needs to be dismantled. So this is a global kind of a conspiracy that is going on against one of the most peaceful, non-predatory, and non-violent, imposing faiths of the world, which is very, very unfortunate. And it is sad that Indian politicians are falling prey to this for their contemporary political expediency.
Pawan Verma, you've heard the eloquent Mr. Sampath on one side, and
it's always very tough, Rahul, to say anything counter to what Pawanji, who's a great scholar on sure, Sanatan Dharma, is. But then I would like to be audacious enough to counter one thing that he said. Of course, the loftiness, the grandeur, the self-assuredness of Sanatan Dharma, I don't know what is Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma is probably a better word, is something that is known. The fact that Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, that is something that is ingrained in our civilization, and that is the only reason India is a secular nation and we are able to assimilate all other faiths. But what happens when historically a theology like this is faced with an Abrahamic theology which calls my way or the highway, that there is only one path to God, that there is if you do not subscribe to this, then you are condemned to hellfire, and it is the legitimate right of the ruler to convert you either by force or allurement or anything into their faith, and that's the bloody history of our nation, right from the conquest of Sindh in 712 and still 1947, and it continues. We've seen every time there is a manifestation of a demographic change. We've seen what happened in Kashmir with the Pandits. You would know that better, Rahul, than anybody else as to the plight of the Kashmiri Pandits. So why is that happening in a secular India? We've seen what's happened in Bangladesh. We've seen what happened in post-poll violence in Bengal and different parts of the country. So what does a faith which is so lofty, so egalitarian, so elevated in grandeur do when it is faced with faiths like this, which are predatory, which are violent, Are you just going to quote the scriptures to those who are going to hack you to death, or are you also going to pick up the weapon against it? Parashuram, who's a avatar of Lord Vishnu, himself committed a huge carnage of those whom he thought were adharmis. Hinduism has never believed in absolute non-violence. All our gods and goddesses are shown with weapons which are not ornamental. The 9 days the Devi is worshipped where she is in a bloody, conquest against different kinds of demons. The Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita asks us to pick up arms even against our own gurus or relatives or elders if we feel that they are on the path of adharma. So, the whole call that we are a pacifist and a very non-violent only in the process of knowledge production, I think that's an important part. But self-defense, self-assured, sure, but self-defense too has not been anathema to the civilization.
Okay.
And whatever, I mean, we bring Savarkar into all of this, the context in which the Hindutva that originated at that time, it was, the Aligarh Muslim University, the secessionist forces, which had gained ground right from the late 19th century, the Lucknow Pact, the Morley-Minto reforms, the separate electorates, the Monkla carnage, the Khilafat agitation, a host of things that were going on where the Hindu numerical strength and the community itself would have dwindled and we would all have become one big Islamic caliphate today. So in that scenario, is it wrong to defend yourself, or is it just good to sit and read scriptures which talk of lofty principles? There is also a call to action in our scriptures. There is a call to action on the path of dharma and on behalf of dharma. And I think political Hindutva, at least in the past, I don't know how it is now, but in the past, in the times of Savarkar and Shama Prasad Mukherjee and the early Hindu Mahasabha and so on, was precisely to do that, to put a bulwark against political Islam, which tried and also succeeded in vivisecting our subcontinent on religious lines.